Okay, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, thank you very much for coming today. Despite the busy time of this period of the year, especially for universities, your presence today confirms the value of the Economy and Society Research Program's mission. So thank you very much for coming. Secondly, a special thank you to our lecturer, Professor Jean-Christophe Iseux von Pfetten, who is president of the Royal Institute of East-West Strategic Studies and visit professor at People's University of China. Thank you for accepting our invitation and for finding time for us despite your hectic agenda. We are really grateful for your presence today, particularly considering that the lecture will address a very strategic topic, which perfectly fits in inspiration behind the Economy and Society Research Program. As we all know, over the last year, China has achieved economic supremacy in the Asian region and has obtained a pivotal role in understanding ongoing worldwide scenarios. Besides the main analyses that have investigated its rising hegemony, some dynamics processes behind its social structure still need to be better focused. Particularly speaking, about the potential roles of the Chinese new elite and their strategic choices. It goes without saying that any decisions in these domains will bring about a profound change in the world balance scenarios and with relevant and global consequences in different and important aspects as energy needs, use of natural resources, foreign policy, strategic alliance, and so on. For instance, the recent China-Russia agreement on the biggest gas deal ever could bring down gas prices across Asia, representing a dramatic shift in energy flows from the west to the east. And by the way, I read this morning on a newspaper that still there is debate between UA, Russia and Ukraine on gas price dispute that still is far to be accommodated. And of course, we must remember that it's definitely not easy for a Westerner to have an internal view of the dynamics surrounding the underpinning Chinese forces in their society. And so this is why today we are giving to you, to this audience, to our audience, a unique opportunity, and we could not hope to have a better lecturer than Professor Iseux to address this complex and strategic topic. Professor Jean-Christophe Iseux von Pfetten is in fact the first and only Caucasian member of the upper house of the Chinese parliament, and he is advisor of the Communist Party. He has been living in China for over 10 years, and also thanks to this he has gained a perspective that is usually not easily accessible. Besides this, Professor Iseux will be able to present today a unique vision of the role played by the new Chinese elites in the definition of policies for a new world balance. So, Professor Iseux was also the youngest ambassador at the United Nations in Geneva, director of China Studies at Regular Policy Institute in Oxford, and he's still currently honorary advisor to several government units in China. Having said this, I don't want to take any more time, and I'm pleased to give the floor to Professor Iseux for this complex lecture. Again, thank you very much for your kind attention, and we really hope you will enjoy today's lecture. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I'm very sorry to be late, but I'm French. Nobody's perfect, really. But I got married to an Italian, which is making me slightly better. I somehow can master the Chinese Red Army, but it has been difficult for me to master time until now. And with the jet lag, and I've been back last weekend to Europe, then and I was in London yesterday, then I thought it was one hour earlier. Anyway, can I actually speak here? Is everybody sort of can hear me here? I do not need to hear that. I will sort of I will distribute this after, which is simply put you a few names and a few structural organization of the State Council with the latest institutional reform, then it will fix you a little bit in the head. Because now the first thing you need to know or to do for you who study probably energy sector or maybe also Asia or China, if you've been coming to this lecture, is the fact that the best way to know about China is definitely not to read the papers. Like our very nice friend just mentioned a paper or papers which he has been reading. It's typically what you should not do. You know, I always tell to presidents and prime ministers and ministers never to read the papers. And they do not have the time anyway. But anyway, the thing is that it's quite important. In order to know about China, you need to go to China and to meet with the people. It's extremely important. Now, what I would like to do first is to sort of very quickly, very in a very sort of clear but relatively sort of simple way, explain how the power structure in China works, and from this power structure then drag into answering a few of your questions or the questions concerning the pipeline, like you just said, and any other questions you want to sort of be dealing with. Now, since New China, or even earlier, because since in fact Mao Zedong taking over the power during the Second World War, China is under the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party. Now, whatever you've heard, whatever you hear, it is very interesting to look at the 18th Congress of the Chinese Communist Party. And the last word of Hu Jintao, the former president, to whom I was an advisor for more than 4 years. And the last word, the last phrase he's saying, I mean, it must be published in Chinese somewhere, but he said, well, whatever the new economy is, you know, we've got maybe more than 50% of China is under private economy. Whatever, you know, the new sort of organization are evolving, whatever reform we've had for the last 30 years and so on, at the end of the day, the party controls absolutely everything. And it is extremely important to understand. Because we tend to sort of think that China is changing a lot over the last 30 years. To tell the truth, the structure and the political structure of the country has not changed a little bit, a iota, over the last 30 years. And it's extremely important. Now, the only thing which is also important to understand is that the Chinese Communist Party has absolutely nothing to do with whatever party you can understand. It's actually even not a party, a political party in the Western sense of it. It is definitely not communist in the Soviet Union or Marxist European understanding on it. It's more like a people's party, a ruling party, you know, which is sort of organizing the entire political life and social life of the country. Now, this party, that's the reason why it's very important to understand how this party is organized. Okay, I was lucky enough, you know, for a very special reason, basically because my great-granduncle was part of the people who organized to have the former leaders of the country, Zhu De, Zhou Enlai, Deng Xiaoping, to come to France after the First World War. He was a member of parliament and head of the French Commission of the Reconstruction of France, for the reconstruction of France at the Parliament and at the Assemblée Nationale. And he organized about 5,000 Chinese youngsters to come to France to participate to reconstruction of the steel mills, petroleum industry, and so on. And we've had the chance to have Deng Xiaoping working for the steel mill of my family. And since then we've sort of entertained very close relationship with the political leader of the country, which allowed me after Oxford to be able to be received with trust by the members of the party, and I still continue to sort of, in a way, serve actually the China in serving the Chinese Communist Party. Now, the Chinese Communist Party is organized in a pyramidal way. Okay, then you understand. You have to understand how it works, the party. Okay, because everybody speaks about nonsense. I mean, you have a few writers which are quite good. I mean, I'm going to, because I'm relatively traditional. I don't like high technology, and at Oxford, you know, we have a pen and we have a pen and paper, and I can tell you, you can do everything with a pen and paper. You can run the world, and you can sort of become multi-millionaire just with a pen and paper. You don't need high tech. Anyway, the party is a pyramidal structure. Okay. Do you have a black one? Oh, maybe it's a bit easier for the people to see. But
you have a blue one.
The blue one might be better. Yes. Okay. Red might be good also, but anyway, for the purpose. Yes. Here we are. Now, you've got 80 million. Okay. Concerning the writers, you have a few writers who speaks about the party relatively well, like David Chambaud, very good friend of mine, who used to be in London at SOS, and then now he's actually at George Washington University, head of a China sort of center. He's probably one of the best, you know, person who has been studying the party, and its hardcore factions within the party, and including the People's Liberation Army. Apart from him, very few people has ever been writing something relatively good on the party, apart from the party itself, actually. I mean, you do have a huge amount of publication in Chinese, who are very truthful to how the party is read. Now, 80 million people, which is organized in a sort of pyramidal way. Then you start by the village level, because you have to understand you still got about 50% of China which are farmers. Yeah? It's very different from our countries, where services you know, tends to be the sort of sector of privilege, and then industry, and then agriculture is peanuts. Now, it's reversed. So there's still agriculture is number one. Then farmers, is the most important, you know, element of China. As a consequence, it's also the most important element of the party. If the party represents the people, the majority of the people being farmers, then it's normal that the majority of the party members are also farmers. Okay, and Mao Zedong said, and it's really true, and I do not see how it will actually be another way. The only way you could eventually go against the party, or the party would destroy itself, would be if you do not fulfill the needs of the farmers. So the farmers put the party in power. It is the farmers which will be putting the party out of power. It's quite important. It's not American. It's not the Soviet Union at the time of the Soviet Union. It's not, you know, the Japanese with Diaoyu Island or whatever. No, or Taiwan, whatever. No. It's the inside. This is peanuts concerning power to the party. What is important is the farmers. Now, 80 million people. Now, you have actually a structure of what Deng Xiaoping used to say socialist democracies, that is to say a democratic structure which goes from the base to the top within the party. You know, this is when they speak about it. Sometimes you hear actually some of the leaders like Xi Jinping, when he went to the States and so on, speaking about our democracy. Okay? The Chinese democracy. Okay, yes, indeed, they have a democracy. It's not the same sort of democracy as you've got here in Europe, but they do have a democracy based on democratic, you know, principles. But simply, it's very different from our democracy, and there is not one democracy. I can guarantee you that you have to refrain to think about universal democracy, because there is definitely not one democracy. Even in Europe, you have a difference between England, you know, Italy, definitely, France, Germany, a very different form of democracy. Now, there's a very amusing, actually, story, which I can tell you, which is nowhere to be seen, because it was reported to me by the translator, who is now a famous general. and he was a translator between Deng Xiaoping and Reagan, and on Carter. When Carter invited him to go to a rodeo, and when he visited in the States, and he sort of Carter had this kind of Texas hat, you know, and he sort of Deng Xiaoping just sort of asked Carter to give him his hat. This had been enormous, and just told Carter with this translator in between, you know, we in China we also have a democracy. It's called socialist democracy, and then Carter, you know, went back to him and said, well, yes, but you know, it's not exactly the same. I mean, we have a universal, because this is, you know, the framework of the Western long-nosed sort of ways of dealing with things, is a democracy which is based on multi-party, okay, and it's quite different from yours. I say, yes, this form of democracy, we tried it during the Qin dynasties, exactly 2,300 years ago, exactly, and the consequence of that has been a reduction of the population by a third, and then obviously said, I don't think we will reproduce this experiment again very soon. We've sort of another type. We're trying another type of democracy. I think it is a very good way of dealing with democracy and multi-form of democracy. Now, socialist democracy, that's really invented by Deng Xiaoping. Then you have a structure, and everything can be read this way in China for almost every danweight. That's Chinese. Every unit of work is read this way, which is embodied in the 5,000 years of history of the Chinese, because it's a hierarchical structure. It's Confucius. Confucius is not so old, but it's sort of just embodying really the spirit of the Chinese, and it is pyramidal. Now, you have the village level, which is one level. Then you probably heard of the township and the county level, which is at a lower level, and then you have the municipal government level. Okay, like cities, different cities, different type of cities, big cities, still 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, now we have. And then you have the provincial government. You all heard about provincial government. The 4 big cities being part of province, like Tianjin, Chongqing, Beijing and Shanghai are provinces. And then you've got the Congress. Now the Congress meet every 5 years. It's about 2,000 people, and it's a Congress. Okay, and the Congress is, all this is organized by election. That's just to say, you know, you are in your unit, your party committee here, and you elect a party secretary here who will be member of the party committee of the level upstairs, who elect a party secretary here who will be member of the party committee upstairs, etc., etc. And here, you elect the 2,000, every 5 years, the 2,000 members who are coming from the grassroots. Now, among those 2,000 members, you have probably about 40% of farmers. Okay. This really represents, actually, the nation. And every 5 years, you have about 40%. Depends on the years, actually, between 40 and 60%. Sometimes in big reform, you have 60%. Now, let's say a medium of 50% of turnover. But it's not all the same people, okay? Not at all. And that's the reason why you have a regeneration of the party quite quickly, and it tends to actually never hear about the same people all the time. You know, it's always different names. You know, you have when you look at the press. Oh, I know the one Xi Jinping. It was already difficult to remember the last one. Okay, now. Now, then, every 5 years, they elect a central committee, okay, which is about 300 people. It's 200 people plus 100 alternate in case there are a few dying, you know, in the plane crash. Now, this is where China's power lies. There's 300 people every 5 years. Is the power in China. There is no other power in China apart from the 300 people every 5 years. Okay? Now, there's 300 people. Obviously, they cannot meet every day, you know, because 300 people is going to be complicated. Then they organize what they say a politburo. That is, they sort of elect, you know, about 30 people, 10%, who is a politburo who meets almost every month. Okay, the Central Committee meets every November, October, every year. Then the 30 people, the politburo, every politburo. Okay, the politburo is quite important to understand that they can meet also in extraordinary session when it's important, in a matter of, you know, state matter or whatever. Now, but every month 30 people meet, and then they elect also a standing committee, which is 7 people now, who are meeting every week. Okay, well, when they are traveling, when there is a proxy and so on, but roughly speaking, they meet every week. Now, you see, you have this structure. However, this is quite important to understand that because, you know, a lot of the people in the West, the media particularly, they always see Xi Jinping with the number 1, number 2, number 3, and then you know, they come out of their closets and 1, 2, 3, okay. They do not run China. None of them. None of the 7 members of the Standing Committee runs China. In fact, none of them can take a decision without actually the backing, the support of a consensus building within special leading groups tied to the Central Committee. And it's quite important to understand that the power in China, and that has started already a long time ago, because Deng Xiaoping really imposed that. This is the main actually political change from Mao Zedong to Deng Xiaoping, because of the fact that Mao Zedong derailed more with the Chinese Cultural Revolution and so on. Then they didn't want to come back to this stupid sort of grasp of power. Then Deng Xiaoping thought it's important that power needs to be diffused. As a consequence, no decision is being taken by one man in the Central Committee, and no decision is being taken by the president or the vice president or the prime minister or whatever. Everything is being taken in the decision is being taken within actually the organization of what is called Central Leading Group, where you have at least 30 members of the Central Committee. Like, I will give you a few of them, which might be of interest to you, because for E and I suppose you must be dealing with energy. One is the Central Leading Group. It's not so much in the press, that nobody speaks about it in the West. I don't know why, because it's the most important thing. But anyway, for economy and finance, which I was an advisor for a little while. This is 30 people who are basically dealing with anything coming from the banking reform to the institutional reform in the sort of economy, like commerce, you know, when they, you know, reassemble the internal commerce with external commerce to do a ministry and so on. Okay, or the organization of SASAC, State Asset Supervision Administration Commission, which basically control 100 of the largest state-owned enterprises, making, roughly speaking, 10% of GDP, making effectively the largest company in the world. Now, all this is organized by that. I mean, there's 30 people. Obviously, you will have the Minister of Planning, you will have the Prime Minister, you will have a couple of Deputy Prime Ministers in charge of economy and finance and so on. Okay. But you also have 4 or 5 generals, which hardly any has anything to do with economy and finance. Or you will have a few people, including 1 or 2 farmers, who do not know hardly how to count. Okay? But that's socialism. You know? Everybody counts at the end of the day. Donc, then you have these committees, which are extremely important, and where decisions are being taken. It's a consensus that is, you need to have a majority of votes in order to go ahead. You know, particularly they're important for the very large budgets, for very large projects. You know, you've had amazing projects over the last 30 years in China, and you will have a few absolutely incredible projects in the next 30 years, which will be handled by him, because the money is everything. You know, in China, it's quite interesting. Money is absolutely extremely important. It's not that you have money will make you powerful. That's not very different from the West. You know, it's too crude. You know, No. It's that there is a slightly more advanced civilization in the sense that money is something you use to organize your power. The power in China is organized on networks. If you hold the key to a network, then you have the power. The money comes afterwards. It's quite important. So that as a consequence, it's quite important also to say that, oh, I mean, you've got a few billionaires, they must be actually extremely powerful. Not at all. You can be a billionaire in China, you're not powerful at all. You will be waiting for meeting with the minister, as exactly the same as anybody else. Filippo, which I've known quite a lot because at my university as an honorary professor, and the former Prime Minister Filippo is not a very sort of intelligent person. He's not a very clever person. He was adopted by Zhou Enlai and so on. But he understood something, probably Zhou Enlai told him, that what is important is to organize, to be in the middle of this spider net of a network of relationship in order to have the power. And he himself, obviously, did not have a great intelligence, but understood something, is that he had to sort of lunch and dine, and he didn't know how to speak too much, so he had good advisors enough to write his reports anyway. But he was in the middle of almost every network in China, and that's the reason why he became Prime Minister. And it's extremely important. Power is based on network, and the party knows about it very well. That's the reason why the party doesn't give anybody the power of a network, which is extremely important. That's the reason why at the time of Falun Gong, everybody thought, oh, why are they going so bad after the Falun Gong? It's not per se the religious element of Falun Gong. The Chinese are not so much anti-religious, contrary to what people think here. It's actually more about the fact that Falun Gong wanted to organize a network, a national network, and that is a no way. Okay, nobody, apart from the party, can have a national network. Well, not exactly. There are two institutions what effectively are more important than the party, not exactly more important, but are behind the party, and are somehow the two most important factions. And there's two important factions, and it's quite interesting. So very few people are speaking about it in the press. Well, one, yes, is the army, the People's Liberation Army. Effectively, the stronger faction, the stronger power behind the party. But the second one, nobody speaks about it. The second one is actually the result of the great emancipation of the Chinese from feudal times by Mao Zedong, and it's called the Federation of Women. The women are the second most important power after the army, behind the party. Very interesting. Nobody speaks about it. Anyway, when I was young, coming to the party.
Use the microphone, please.
Okay, because nobody here. Why would you do that? Okay, then with the women. There is a common joke in China, I suppose in Italy as well, when I see my wife, is that my boss, let's suppose I'm a minister, okay, or a vice minister, my boss is the minister. The boss of the minister is the prime minister, and the boss of the prime minister is the secretary of the party. And who is the boss of the secretary of the party? His wife. But we're laughing, but in China it's actually true. But anyway, it's a Mao Zedong thing, which is ban mian tian. Ban mian tian, I don't know if you've ever heard of this in Chinese. It means the sky, he said that, he got up one day, terrible, and thought the sky must be cut in two. Okay, half for the women, half for the men. Yeah. The problem now, I think that probably 70% of the sky is owned by the women. But anyway, then here, in the structure of the Central Committee, you do have factions. The two most important factions are the two which I've just been speaking about. But you do have also other factions which evolve with time. At the time of Mao Zedong, you had a Hunan Bang, for example, the clique of Hunan, because it was coming from Hunan. At Deng Xiaoping time, there was the Sichuan clique, because it was coming from Sichuan, and so on. Now, at the time of Jiang Zemin, you had the Shanghai clique. And everybody has heard about it because it was coming from Shanghai and so on. Now you have the Beijing clique also, or the Shandong clique, the Northern clique, which is actually quite important. You have also, at the time of Hu Jintao, the clique from the Youth Communist League, which was extremely important. And then, obviously, because they are making babies also as leaders, then you have also the princelings, clique, which is another clique. Okay? But all this is relatively minor in front of the two most important, the military and the women. Okay? I got to know about the women in a very strange way, because it's actually not very easy to know about it. It's not to grasp where the women, why and how the women are so important in China, because they are not visible in the forefront. Well, the army is also not visible in the forefront. You will tell me it's true. But when there was an earthquake in 1998, and there was a flood, and I've organized for about 20 million of goods to be delivered to the area which were sort of sinister. And then I went to my friends in the military and I said, well, maybe the military could organize it. And I said, well, we've got already 1 million people dispatched everywhere. It would be difficult, but go and see the women. I said, 1 million women. Okay. Then organized me to meet with the president of the Federation of Women, was a wonderful lady. And at the time I was young and handsome and married. And obviously the women were all after me. And as a consequence, I've organized a 20 million of goods to be dispatched by the Federation of Women. Because the Federation of Women, apart from the party, apart from the government, and apart from the army, is the only one who has a structure, pyramidal structure, everywhere. And I could, through them, dispatch all those goods. It was clothes, it was food, pasta, and so on, coming from Japan, from Hong Kong, from London, and so on, to the grassroots. And particularly to the people who most need it, the women and the children. Because obviously the women, the reason why they own 70% of the world, for the world probably also, but of China, is because they also are controlling the children. And all the children organization belong to the women organization in China. And it means that actually, as amount of people, is huge. And the children tend to, sort of like in Italy, go away from the family very early, when you're 20, you're still a child in China. When you're 25, you still actually go back to your mother, okay? Then there is this element of very matriarchal society, which is embodied for a very, very, very long time. The man is going to fight, okay, but the women are staying, And sometimes it was fighting for 2 or 3 or 4 years, like Genghis Khan, when the people were going in the west, the women were staying, behind with all the family and the children. Now, exactly the same. The mentality in China, exactly the same now. All this to say is that that's how I discovered the power of this network, and very simple, very low profile, extremely low profile, but so powerful. Absolutely so powerful. If you want to get a message to the president, go through the women. It's much easier. And then the military. Alors, the military, I have known this sort of power of the military behind, as a faction, a very strong faction behind the party, because I have been introduced to China through them. Okay, I was invited by the former chief of staff of the military to go to China and to advise them on the different issues and present it to the party to sort of help them participate to the reform of the state-owned enterprises, because this was really what I was an expert. I mean, we're never an expert on anything in China, but anyway. At Oxford, and then I had done some work with Eastern Europe and Russia, and then I thought I could sort of implement what I got to know in China. Obviously, it's sort of much bigger, but it was very interesting. Now, all this makes that any other things which I'm telling you, you never heard about it, because what you've heard, it's not where the decision lies. Okay, this is where the decision lies. Okay, what you heard is the representation of power, okay? It's like the Chinese opera, okay? You start in Chinese opera, 戏剧, you start and then do pantomime like this, and then you have someone who is, for example, green, a green face. And then little by little, you know, after half an hour, three-quarters of an hour, you find that the green face is becoming whiter and whiter. And the green face becomes white. They change. You know, I don't know if you've noticed that they change the mask. I don't know this trick in China. Anyway, maybe you don't know. Now, the white is a bad person. It's a vision of death, white, for the Chinese. And green is relatively the soldier. It's already a bit in between. You know, red is a good, is nice, is good. Yellow is the king, the emperor. Okay. Now, and then you see, you know, the change of the people, because in reality, sort of, you have the representation of something which is not the same. Okay. And everything is like this in China. You know, you've got a total difference. You've got a main difference between representation, between essence and existence, and we would say in French, but between the representation and what it is in reality. Okay. And they can transcend this. You know, it's a dialectic movement, you know, between the two, in a way, between, you know, transcendence and in the same times getting in and out. It's quite interesting. Anyway, I don't want to complexify too much, but it is in the logic. It's in the Chinese logic. There's another thing very important with the Chinese to understand, is that you have to leave your baggage behind you, you know, because we are actually, you know, element of the Judeo-Christianic civilization, sort of formatted in the last 3,000 years. It's maybe long, maybe 2,000 years, into a very sort of hypothetical-deductive logic, which is very limited. In fact, well, it has helped us to do computers, you know, 1 plus 1, 1, 0, 1, 0, etc. It's quite limited at the end of the day. That is to say, basically, it's A plus A star equals 0. You have a proposal, and you have the opposition to this proposal, and when you get it together, 0, all the time. Right, wrong, good, bad. You know, Catholic Church is particularly good in this. And okay, all this is make you sort of manichaeist, and everybody, you know, Descartes, the French, bloody hell. Anyway, in China, A plus A star equal 2A. I do not criticize the Catholic Church. I love them very much. I'm actually myself Catholic. Nobody's perfect, but I am. Now, A plus A star, and I've organized the first meeting ever between actually the Roman Curia and the Standing Committee at my home in France 4 years ago. And ever since, they are talking to each other, you know, because these people do not talk too much. Anyway, A plus A star equals 2A. This is China. That is the Chinese are incredible. They have a proposal and the opposite in their head, and then can still walk straight. Okay? Now, it's the equilibrium, the balance between the opposite, which makes the strength of the individual so much more powerful than our Judeo-Christianic civilization. So much powerful, so much more advanced. And that's the reason why the Chinese understand our logic, but we do not understand their logic. And this is the main reason, and I have been an advisor of more than 100 multinationals. I've done a bit of a fortune out of this. I've organized more than $2 billion every year for the last 15 years of investment in China. And every meetings I am between a European or Western firms and the Chinese company or Chinese unit of work, you have this problem of understanding between this and that. Everything, like for example, the lawyers, you know, because we like lawyers in the West. The lawyers which are getting into this framework, you know, it is this but not that. The problem is the Chinese, it's always gray. It could be this or it could be that. You know, I remember my secretary, or at the beginning I was working for the Red Army for 2 years, and it was very interesting because I had 7 soldiers at my service. It was very nice, anyway. And but I was a bit of a difficulty at the beginning to understand what they wanted sometimes. And then I had a bit of a confidant among them, and then I asked him, "This guy, is he good or bad?" And he says, "Well, he's good. Well, he could be bad." It was impossible to do anything. Now, it's this gray area, permanent gray area, is extremely important because it's true. A person in certain environment can be considered as good, in another can be considered bad. At certain time, it can be good, and sort of. And it's a kind of flow. It moves and so on. Anyway, all this is what is called harmonious, l'harmonie. Okay, and that's Hu Jintao, former leader, wonderful man, who will be remembered in the history of China. Probably more than Jiang Zemin and more than Xi Jinping. Well, we do not know what Jiang Zemin will do in the future, but I think so. The Hu Jintao is not because I have been close to him in the last 4 or 5 years, but it's only also because he has done an amazing thing, which is giving power back to the farmers with Wen Jiabao as the prime minister, and levy all the tax and starting the land reform, 2D Geiger, which I think is probably the most, it's not a political, it's a society reform, but it is one of the most incredible. I mean, he has had a lot of guts. He has been criticized a lot, like some people like the other one, like Boshilai, these people. But it's important to acknowledge what he has been doing, even so he was a very sort of low profile, in a way, leader, different from Xi Jinping, who is very exuberant. He likes to dance, to drink. Okay, he's Reagan. It's like Reagan. He speaks a lot but doesn't say anything. Now, Hu Jintao is very different. He actually doesn't speak at all, or a very small amount. But when he speaks very, very deep. And this reform of the land reform, giving back the power to the people, that basically the farmers can own the land use right of their sort of land. This is what land reform is all about, and then can exchange between one another, which means that you have a commercial activity, which means that you have wealth, which is coming to the countryside. It means that you have a new 300 million people coming now to be, the middle class, these people in China will sort of participate to the new model of internal consumption growth model. That is extremely important, because this is the future of the economic sustainability, growth sustainability of China, but probably also of the world. Now, harmonious society is what Hu Jintao has put forward. He is the one which basically has started to say, okay, stop with what we've been learning until now. Let's go back to our roots. Our roots is Confucius. Confucius says what? He says harmonious society. And that's the reason why he has been putting everything around this harmonious society, which is really the inner core of the Chinese. It's what the Chinese always felt, as really being dear to the way they are thinking. Because they are not Marxist, in a way. Marxist, that's another thing, also very important to understand. For us, Marxist, because we are bipolar, A plus A equals 0, they're very limited, then we've got capitalism and socialism, or Marxism, whatever. Now, Marxist-Juyi in Chinese, for the Chinese, doesn't mean socialism. So we are thinking. Marxism, Marxist-Juyi, means coming from the West. Which means that everything from, well, when you look at actually Le Capital or writings from Marx, Marx himself is not a Marxist, actually. Or Marx himself is not a socialist, per se. He's describing the society and the economic sort of power within the society. As a consequence, capitalism is also described, and it is inherent of a society which comes from the West. As a consequence, capitalism for China, this framework, is a Marxist idea. Okay? Then Marxism, they imported from the West all this. As a consequence, Hu Jintao started to say, well, let's stop with all this. Maybe we should not actually import so much from the West. Deng Xiaoping started already because he says we open the window, because for the open door policy, we need to put a net because you've got some mosquitoes which get in. Then we have to sort of stop the mosquitoes from the West. But anyway, let's stop a little bit here and try to see, what are the inner strengths of our civilization. And the inner strength of our civilization is Confucius and the harmonious society. And this has nothing to do with the West. It has nothing to do with capitalism, socialism, whatever. Okay, we've imported this. We are using it. At least we're adapting it to our society, the Chinese characteristics, probably you've heard of it. Market economy with Chinese characteristics, that's what it means. It's then sharpening words. But really, now we need to get back to the inner strengths of the Chinese people as a civilization, and all this is the harmonious society. All this is, conducive, to the fact that the great revolution of our people is the Xiaokang, that is, the well-off society, to make sure that our people can elevate their way of life all together to the same, actually, goal of the emancipation of the civilization. Now, because they have been hurt. The Chinese have been hurt by 200 years of humiliation from the West. It's extremely important, this. The 19th century, we have gone there and sort of opened comptoir and, killed their sort of temples and destroyed their sort of palaces and so on. And this, which was basically the weakness of the late Qing dynasty, because of the weakness of the late Qing dynasty, has been perceived also because the Qing dynasty has been more open to the West. They invited Italian Jesuits. It's not because of you, don't worry. But Italian Jesuits to come and learn, about the West, astronomy and so on. Then all this makes that they felt that they have been hurt and humiliated. And there is in the Chinese an ultimate element, not a revenge. They will never go outside to make any revenge. But there is, for them, and it is important, they need to go back to the glory and the splendor of their civilization, because they have been splendid, and they can and they have the potentiality to be splendid enough. Now, again, harmonious societies, that's what I wanted to say about this. I have not to diverge too much. Representation. What you know about actually the organization of power in China, you have to see exactly what we have to speak about. Insights from China, leadership, policies. Yeah, policies. Leadership, I've just spoke about it. Policies. New world balance. Okay, I will into the international relations. Now, this is another pyramid, which is the state council. That's the representation, the tip of the iceberg. Very little tip. The big iceberg is the party. And you've got the state council. State council, at the top you've got a prime minister, Li Keqiang, going to London next week. And then it's going down. And then you have the deputy prime minister, and then the state councillor. Okay, very good. Then you've got the commissions. The two most important commissions, SASAC, very important to remember. This is potentially actually the most important economic arms in the world. Okay, and then it's a very nice thing. This actually, this in order to understand all the implementation of what I've just said before. You've got 100. It's 120. It's reducing by fusion, acquisition, merger and acquisition. Now, roughly 100 companies, like China Mobile, Sinopec, PetroChina, and so on. Okay. I was part, actually, under Zhu when Zhu took me on board. I was part of the group which actually created SASAC. And I remember very well when they wanted to do it, they wanted to have an organization, commission, which was relatively independent from the State Council. And who sort of make actually the CEOs of the companies, the large companies, competitive, but also applying a framework from the West in terms of management. The West, we have been quite good in terms of economic management of our companies here. Then I thought, because I was a professor of management and so on, they took me on board and I said, what do we do? Well, yes, we need to do that. Okay, great. But I said, you have to be careful, because these companies has not to go away from fulfilling the ultimate goal of satisfying the vested interest of the Chinese Communist Party. Otherwise, you build up a private economy, and if all your economic arms got away from the grip of the party will sort of weaken. I said, well, that's a very good idea. Okay, let's organize a commission, SASAC, which is sort of organizing the training of their leaders in a capitalistic way. Every year, I'm part of that. I organize to send them to Oxford, to Harvard, and so on, to be trained by the best professors, and then come back, and then the companies are really run like a private company, like a private multinational. Exactly. And they satisfy, okay, the shareholders. Okay, and the shareholders are the Chinese Communist Party. And it's a reverse from what Mao Zedong said about Deng Xiaoping. You know, it was at some point, Deng Xiaoping has been put down into jail twice, and the second time, Mao Zedong said to Deng Xiaoping, "You are a capitalistic dog hidden under a communist coat. Sasak is a communist dog or cat hidden under a capitalistic code." That is to say, the framework, the entire framework is capitalistic, but in reality, it satisfies the vested interest of the shareholders, being the Chinese Communist Party. It's very important to remember that. And even if it is publicly listed, and they do not care, because the publicly listing is 10, 15, 18% maximum. The mother company, CNPC, is what call the shots after PetroChina. PetroChina is the largest company in the world, but behind the largest company in the world, you have even a larger company, which is CNPC. Okay. And behind CNPC, you have even a larger company, which is called I should not say that. It's called something, which is controlled by the Chinese People Liberation Army, and which constitute about 20,000 companies. Then they know how to actually control economic sort of entities, and that's at the end of the day, they know, they understand that the economy is actually part of the overall framework of power. SASAC, now very important to understand SASAC, most important for us because all these companies are becoming multinationals. I remember at the start of SASAC, only one state power was member of Fortune 500. I'm speaking in 2002. 12 years afterwards, we've got 49 member of Fortune 500. I guarantee you, by the end of the decade, we might have 100 member of Fortune 500. Very important. They are becoming extremely. It's not only because they are becoming bigger and bigger. They also, the rest of the world is sort of crawling down. But anyway, now the other very important commission, which is the more traditional commission, is the NDRC, National Development and Reform Commission, which is basically the planning commissions, the old planning commissions. And planning is still around, you know, even if it is a market economy. It's actually very much the price and so on is very much controlled by the state. Now that's a very important commission, which is on the top of a lot of things, like Ministry of Commerce. You know. Then you've got ministries, and MOFA, okay, Foreign Affairs, we're on the top of the embassies and all the protocol, and then MOFA, probably quite important also. And then you've got the state administration, and state administration of environmental protection, you know, etc., etc. Now, then you have the provincial level with the governor, the governors, yeah, vice governors, and then you've got the municipal government with the mayors, and then you've got the township, county, village, everybody. Now, the thing is that when the company or an institute or whatever goes to China, they actually tend to meet the governor. The governor. Good. The governor told me I will be able to sort of make the deal. Wonderful. Wait 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, no deal. Why? Because the governor is not in power. The governor, okay, is member, is a representation of power again. The governor is a member of, where are we here? Here, I suppose. Is a member of the party committee here. Is usually the deputy party secretary of the party committee of the province. But he has a party secretary, he has another deputy party secretary, and you've got about probably another 7 to 14 members of the party committee. Then, okay, he needs to sell, you know, new project to the party committee, and the party committee might have other agenda. Then the governor is not in charge. It's not only this, the mayor is not in charge. You have a party committee on the top of the mayor in the municipal government. But not only this, the minister of the Ministry of Commerce, you know, is not in charge because he has to refer to the state, to the a large group, the Central Group for Economic Finance. Even the Prime Minister here, Li Keqiang, is not in charge. There is a very famous story about Krupp, ThyssenKrupp,
And I got to know because of Zhurongji told me in the past. Zhurongji was from Shanghai, and he wanted to sort of. It was quite close to the German technology, and he wanted to sort of introduce German technology to China, which he did to a certain extent. And with students films, they wanted to do a maglev. Okay. And every year, he would go to the Central Economic Finance for the budget, because it was 1 billion at the time, it was enormous. And then every year, they would say, Mr. Prime Minister, can you come back next year with another figure? It's too expensive, basically. You know, the Prime Minister could not get the project himself, and he wanted to get the project. He got the project before just at retirement time, basically. But it's a good story because it means that even the Prime Minister alone cannot decide on anything in China. Again, consensus building. Up to the top, even on economic terms, which are maybe more benign than social or political sort of agenda. But he cannot decide himself. He needs to go back to the relevant committee. Policies, but why I speak about this is because this is where also the policies are coming. You know, you've probably heard of a lot of institutional reform lately, which is trying to sort of make the government more lean and mean, and they're actually relatively successful in this, but it's a big country, that's 1,300,000,000 people, then it's not so easy to implement things, okay? Obviously you have had rampant sort of corruption at a low level. It's quite important to understand that actually all this issue of corruption, because I'm sure that someone will ask me about that, because it has been quite strong with the new president being very vocal concerning going against corruption in the country. Now, every time it's business as usual. When I remember when Jiang Zemin came, there was a the movement of the three accents, which basically was an anti-corruption sort of movement at the beginning of Jiang Zemin, and which lasted 2 years, and afterwards business as usual. Hu Jintao at the beginning also his tenure also enforced a 1-year anti-corruption scheme, and then after business as usual. Now Xi Jinping, we are 1.5 into this big anti-corruption scheme, which will last for another 6 months. Now, corruption is a bit everywhere, but it's particularly strong at the base. That's where actually it's very difficult for the party to actually solve issues of corruption, because it's inherent in the fabric of the society, and it's not inherent to the Chinese Communist Party at all. Corruption has existed in China for 5,000 years. You know. When you have a government, you have corruption. You know. The only thing the Chinese Communist Party lately has been probably more successful than any other dynasties is to eradicate it strongly at the top, that is to say, among the people of the upper level of the structure of the party. You know, the central committee, definitely, but also the provincial level and the municipal level. Under, it's more of a difficulties, obviously. But the top has been more or less eradicated, and that's quite good. The problem now, it's actually more complicated to eradicate it because of the fact that the economy is becoming more private, and as a consequence, it's more difficult to enforce things in individuals which are more satellites and doesn't really necessarily belong to a unit of work. However, that's another thing. Private, a lot of people, Dr. Feng, for example, very good friend of mine from the NDRC, he feels that there's 50% of private economy, and I've always said this is not true. You do have maximum really 25 or 30% of private economy in China. But the simple reason is because any entity, economic entity, is linked to its suppliers and customers through the network of the party. Why a person would start a company, particularly a large company, is because he has been able to get this network out of a previous job where he used to be in the stable enterprises. And it's more a consequence of deregulation than actually purely entrepreneurship. However, you do have entrepreneurship at the base. You have the odd sort of coffee shops and maison des femmes, coiffeurs around the corner, but this doesn't really represent a very large part of the economy. The large part of the economy, in particular very large private firms, are tied to the party in one way or another. And a simple thing, even private foreign firms in China are tied to the party. Very few private firms knows about it, but when you start actually a company, and company grows 300, 400, 1,000, 2,000, 5,000, necessarily you do have members of the party into your personnel. And these members of the parties get the group and organize a party committee, and the party secretary reports to actually the local entity, party committee, where the factory or the entity, the company is situated. And as an effect, you have actually this reporting line to the party for any companies of a certain size in China. I don't want to frighten you too much. But anyway, New World Balance. The
4 points, members of the central leading groups. They are elected, they are appointed by somebody?
They are elected. They are elected. The Central Committee every 5 years, okay, no, the Congress every 5 years elect the Central Committee, but also elect, but it's two. In fact, they are proposed first. It's a sort of nomination, there is a proposal, but there are always more than 30. And usually it's 30 within a group. They are proposed, and then they are confirmed by election through the Congress every 5 years. Do you see what I mean?
Well, there are candidates.
Yes.
Must obtain consensus above the vote.
Yes.
So this from starting from the base up.
Yes, it starts from not from the base. It's actually only at the level of Congress. Yeah, because there are more experts. I mean, more or less, not necessarily experts, because there are a few which are not experts, depending where. You do have a lot of central group. For example, you have a central group for agriculture, for example, where you do have a lot of entities which are not necessarily experts. You have a leading group for foreign affairs, where you do have more experts. It depends which central group. But they are actually nominated by the Central Committee. They are proposed by the Central Committee, and then they are elected by the Congress every 5 years. Then the tenure, is usually of 5 years.
And the vote is open or sealed?
That's a good question. For the member of the central group, I have to see, because I participated to a few of them. No, it's closed. Closed. It's not open. It's not by standing. But the nomination at the Central Committee of the Standing Committee is by hands. Yeah, very good question. You have I have two questions, no?
No, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah, we will have a question and answer at the end of the lesson. Just to
No, it's good also. I mean, they can ask the central meeting groups. It is not very sort of widely open and acknowledged, in papers in the West. But this is what is making really the effective policies are born in the central leading group. They are not born at the Ministry of Commerce. They are not born in the State Council. The State Council only implement the policy which has been born into the realm of the central leading group. For example, the central leading group for economic and finance, if you are interested in this, is an entity which, from this entity, you have working committees. Like every 5 years, they create a working committee. They were a working committee, for example, of the large enterprises, was the Large Enterprises Working Commission at the time. It was even a commission. Now, it's coming from the leading group, and they have their own staff, and research personnel, and so on. Sometimes can be quite large. I mean, for the large enterprises working committee, I'm speaking before SASAC was born, there was at least 200 people, okay, supporting staff. Then this entity can create commission, can create committee with staff, okay? And they drag usually their staff from permanent organization in the Central Committee. The Central Committee has got, the party has got its own government, okay, with a central foreign committee, which is dealing with, for example, when Xi Jinping is going to travel, it's not organized by the State Council, by the embassy, by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It's organized by the Foreign Affairs of the Central Committee, which has got a Department of International Relations, international department. You have also an organization department, which is organizing the training and more the appointment of the different ministers, vice ministers, head of departments in the central government and in local governments. You have the Central Party School, you probably heard, who are training actually the leaders, including provincial leaders. And you do have actually, there's a permanent organization which supports the work of the Central Committee and which is as large as the State Council, the government. Okay? It's a little bit hidden, behind actually the State Council, behind the government. And you have reference between the two. Like, for example, as I said, you've got the guy who is governor, is the deputy secretary of the provincial party committee. But you also have the minister of MOFCOM would be probably member of the, not necessarily, but sometimes member of the leading group for economy and finance. The, for example, Mighty People's Bank head, Mr. Joe, which has been there forever, is a member of this economic commission and central committee. The head of the planning commission, the head of SASAC are usually also a member of it. The minister of MOFA is also a member of it. And you do have interrelationship, between the party and the State Council. But you can also have members of the State Council which are not members of the party. The Minister of Science and Technology, Wang Yang, for example, is not a member of the party, and he's the Minister of the Ministry of Science and Technology. But you do have a few special cases. And also, this has not to be confounded with the organization of the legislative houses, okay? Where the laws come from, because it's quite important over the last 30 years you've had new laws, you have a huge amount of reform which comes from the rearrangement of a legal framework. Now, where the legal framework comes from is something which is totally independent from that. Not totally independent, but which is relatively independent from that. One is the lower house of parliament, which is the National People's Congress, which is organized in the same way, that you have a central and then you have a provincial and municipal, and it goes up to township. And then you have, which is a legislative house, which votes on legal framework, with subcommittee, which also have got a subcommittee for finance, subcommittee for foreign affairs, a subcommittee for economy and commerce, and so on. And then you have the CPPCC, which is like a higher upper house of parliament, which is organized the same way as well, and where the laws are more or less being born. It's a very interesting system. Here, it's 95% of the members of the Congress are members of the party. Okay? But here, only 15% is member of the party. It's quite interesting. The upper house of parliament, TPPCC, is not a legislative house. They cannot actually enforce laws like the Senate in relationship to the Assembly in France, or the House of Lords in relationship with the House of Commons. But the base is very much wider than the party, because you will have many other elements of the society, such as representation of the farmers, not as members of the party. The representation of what they call democratic parties, other parties, which has been born out of the Second World War, like the Taiwanese party, Jean-Christophe and then you have also representation of the academia, of the business community, of many other by quota. And each of them have got sort of association which elect actually their representation at the upper house of parliament. And at the upper, that's where I was sitting. And at the upper house of parliament, it's quite interesting because the people are more expert on certain areas. And that's where they put forward a change, a new bill. This has to go through a supporting election of the House, where they are. And then once it's accepted, it has to go from a subcommittee already to be drafted. And then it has to go through the House, through election. And then when it's actually supported by the majority of votes, then it goes to the NPC. It goes to the lower house of parliament here. And then it's changed again in accordance with directive of the party to become a law or a directive, depending if it is at national or local level. I'll give you an example. My constituency was Manchuria, was Chongchu in 2001. I was proposed to be a member of Chongchu CPPCC, and I made a speech, and I was sort of elected at 62% of the vote, my peers. I became a member of the CPPCC, and the first thing I did is to go to the subcommittee on economy and finance to go against America, basically, because it was at the time of China going into the WTO, and I was very dear to the farmers, the corn farmers over there in Northeast China, because the WTO would have had a direct effect of importation of corn from subsidized America at half the price of the production of corn, the price of production of corn in Chongqing. And then you have Dachang, which is the largest Asian corn producer, employing about 1 million people, which means that you would have had 500,000 of redundancy of the scheme. Then I thought, no way, we cannot do that. Then I put forward actually a plan for subsidizing Dachang, which was going against the WTO. And obviously they were very keen. The Chinese were sort of wonderful, it comes from a foreigner, and they might actually go through a little bit faster. Anyway, then I got to sort of present it to the House. It was supported by 95%. I remember actually I went to the party secretary and I said, why? I mean, have I had 95% of votes when I had only sort of 62% of votes supporting my case in the election of the parliament? Because I've worked it for 2 weeks. My election of the parliament I worked it for 1 year. My speech and so. And he said, well, it's not simply because we understood actually 95% of your speech. That it went through, okay, and it was sort of reviewed by the subcommittee already, but very small amount of changes. Yeah? And it went through 95%, and it went to the lower house, of Chongqing, and it became a directive, at municipal government, which saved 500,000 people. I'm happy to have saved 500,000 people. Yeah? At least in China, you can do things. Here in the West, you integrate the toilets as a member of parliament. Now, the thing is that what happened is then they thought it was so good that they went to the provincial government, which was Jilin province. And then the Jilin government accepted it to become a directive to a province. And then it went up to the center, but then the center, because of the WTO, they could not accept it at the national level, but they accepted at certain level for other types of subsidies in other areas, such as in the west of China, western China. I put forward another bill, which was for, at that time, because everything was people. My university is people's university. My university is the university of the party. 90% of the cadre of the party come from the university. Now, People's University, People's Party, not yet soon, and then People's Government, People's whatever. And I thought that we could, we could sort of put forward a People's Fund. It's one of the things which was a little bit difficult in China, and I think would go against the stability of the party. And I spoke a lot about this with the team under Zhurongji, is the fact that all this reform might actually weaken the individual members of the party, because the party was sort of shooting into their sort of foot constantly, and particularly some of their sort of members, which were sort of happily employed by SOEs, and then from one day to another would be made redundant. You know, certain areas in China, like in Rust Belt and Northeast China and so on, that was a big case. Now I think, well, at least what we need to do for them is to organize a people's fund. That's the kind of national social security, like the French way, you know, but a little bit more open maybe. And then I put forward here a scheme for a people's fund, you know, at my constituency, and which was very well considered. Was a bit difficult to implement, however, because the structure was not there, and you need to have actually a very specific structure which needs to be coming from the national level. That was some of my own mistakes. But anyway, it went to the provincial government. Okay. It was accepted at provincial government, and then went to the central government. And the central government, they built up out of this the currently what is known as National Social Security Fund, which was sort of at that time handled by the former People's Bank head called Dai Xiaolong. I don't know if you've heard of it, but wonderful man, by the way. Behind the scene and very, very low profile, but absolutely critical man. Extremely important, this National Social Security Fund. I'm very proud to have sort of been the sort of legal sort of stone to emerge this huge stone. I mean, I've got a very small amount of things out of what it is now and what I have sort of put forward when at the time in 2002. There is a big change, but however, this is very fundamental because this is the reason why we will have actually effectively a middle class in China, arising from the countryside, from the farmers. You know, the farmers, they are not poor, but they have actually quite a lot of means. But obviously there is, until now, a very small amount of social security. There has been a very small amount of social security. If your parents sort of have got disease, cancer, or whatever, you need to use huge funds to bring them to hospital to sort of have them covered. You know. Particularly since Deng Xiaoping, because the entire freight board has collapsed after Deng Xiaoping. Then this is an issue. This is an issue because it means that this money is not participating to the consumption society. And the only way it can participate is if you take the weight off the farmers of the fact that they need to spend money for the parents and for themselves. And that the solution is a National Social Security Fund. Then at the present moment it covers 50% of the bills. And I think, the next revolution, and probably the revolution of this government, very few people are speaking about it in the press, which is why we need to do the press, there's nothing in the press, is the fact that one of the things Xi Jinping wants to do, or exactly Li Keqiang, the Prime Minister, with his idea, because he's an economist, and he's actually very good in implementing things, and we need to have a Prime Minister that doesn't only talk, but also actually walk the talk, and I think he's a good one, is to effectively drag more tax out of the civil society. You know, they have changed the tax collection laws from 12% to 30%, meaning that this year, 2014, at the end of the year, we will have actually more than 280 billion renminbi of tax collected with state enterprises, compared to 95 billion last year. Out of 1.3 trillion renminbi revenue. And the difference will go, not all of it, because some of the things will go for the environment, but most of it will go to cover the expenses of the healthcare bills of the farmers. And that will be the way for the farmers to start to spend their money, and to make the machine. You will have effectively an America, a new America, with people spending money, and have the economy which is really purely based on this internal consumption, society, which will be the backbone, which is actually now already the engine of growth of Asia. It will become the engine of growth of the world, and then we need it. It's not us, America, a little bit, not that much. We need it. We need China. The world needs China. Without China and without this, we are actually getting into a huge gold gun. We need to have Chinese to spend money. Without the Chinese spending money, I mean, I do not see the future of the world very, very beautiful. Now, new world balance. Okay, well, that comes quite well into the new world balance, I suppose, because you are all macroeconomists and experts into things in the world. Now, no, you do not have a new world balance. This thing with world balance is again come from a totally Manichaeist view of the world, either or. Okay, this kind of framework you had, a Cold War between Soviet Union and America. No. Forget it. China will never get it. China will never oppose itself to America. In fact, I think they are probably the best allies in the world, in the country. The world has and is already, for more than 10 years, a multipolar world. And you will not have a new world order in accordance of, here we are, China becoming, equal to America because of GDP reasons. I mean, China GDP per capita is still number 100. You have to look at that. It's still a developing country. It's not an extremely powerful nation, and it's also a very inward-looking nation. They do not look at the rest of the world. They look first at their own people. And they need to have another 100 years to deal with their people. It's 1,300 million people. They have other things to do than to deal with the American or the Russian or whoever. Okay. Now, obviously, you will tell me, but what about? You've got you just mentioned it. This strategic alliance with Russia, which is not a strategic alliance. They hate the Russian. Or this Dario Island with the Japanese. Okay. Well, they hate the Japanese for the last 2,000 years. Now, this is skirmishes around because obviously, and there's always been. That's like the people saying now, Xinjiang. Here we are. We have actually the Muslim. It's a big issue in China. Under Zhuangzi, when I was working for the Prime Minister, I remember there was actually the pipeline. Okay, you are in energy. Okay. Pipeline, which was going through Urumqi to go to Shanghai, the famous first pipeline. They constructed it in 4 years. It was normally being constructed for 6 months because the Taliban sort of money given to the Uyghurs at the time was blowing up the pipeline all the way from Kazakhstan. Now, and obviously the Chinese being relatively weak, contrary to what you think, they were very weak at the time and actually did not really do too much. As a consequence, they had to enforce an entire sort of security along the pipeline. And at that time, there has been a lot of difficulties already, a lot of people dying. And then 9/11 has changed a lot because it was a big alignment, the first really big sort of alignment between China and America. Bush Jr., they used to agree on their disagreement very, very, very well. In fact, it's quite interesting. That's probably the best entendement has been between Bush and China, actually. And also at that time, then they started to think, okay, we can enforce, and the rest of the world will not sort of be totally sort of after us, and we will enforce to try to get rid of these terrorists or difficult Uyghurs in Xinjiang, and they effectively put more than 20,000 people in jail. Now, nobody knows about that because it was just after 9/11, you know, that it was a big crusade, you know. Now they are putting 200 people in prison and everybody says, oh. Go back to 10 years ago. Now, a Muslim, you've got 100 million Muslims in China. Then obviously this is a problem. Okay? But you know, I would say that I have actually managed to deal with 100 million Muslims much more than we do manage. You know, in Germany, or Italy, I'm not sure, but in France, for example, we've got some difficulties. Or in England. Then you go to Xinjiang, to Ningxiang, for example, this province in the middle, absolutely a fantastic cohesion between the Han and the Hui. You go to Sichuan, beautiful cohesion with the Hui. The Hui, they are everywhere in China. Then as a consequence, they did integrate the Hui very well. It's not because you have these problems which come from the West, by the way. It's come from the West. It's come from outside China. Where you have finance coming from outside China, including the Turkish, which makes actually the Xinjiang much more exposed than other areas of China. But the Muslims are not only in Xinjiang. Okay? You have actually only a third, I mean even less than a third of the Muslims being in Xinjiang. The rest of China doesn't have this problem. Then I think that we need to put the things in perspective. And it's one of the things. And all the little skirmishes, Vietnam, a long time. They have had actually, the two communist parties hating each other for a very long time. The borders, you know, you still got issues concerning borders at the present moment between Vietnam and China. Okay, and that's the reason why not going to the sea, because you know the Vietnamese, the sea that everybody sort of tried to safeguard the Spanish part of the island, and why not going after that? Okay. 3 weeks ago, I was with the Deputy Chief of Staff of Vietnam, and then the Chief of Staff of China, and Fallon, the former sort of Central and Pacific Air Command of America. And this will be sort of solved. It's not just a question of give and take, you know, exchange, you know, commercial. Everything is about exchange. You know, you give this, they take that. Okay. And then you have Philippines. Well, that's very much because of Americans. The Americans, they like very much to play on both fronts, you know, and try to sort of. Then you have the closure of the eastern seas with Diaoyu Island and the Japanese, and that serves the interest of the American because of containment, but also it serves the interest of the Japanese. The Japanese, you do not have enemy. China doesn't have any enemy. Okay. It has, however, a long time issue with Japan. America is not the enemy, will never be the enemy of China. The Russians, they know about it, you know, and since they have been Russian, it's much better than when they were Soviet Union, there was another issue. But Japan, you have actually a cultural and historical element which makes that basically the Japanese come from China, you know, when you look at the history, the Northeast China. It all started with a treason, if you know about the history, during the Qing dynasty. Again, this Qing dynasty is quite important. 2000, I think, 500 years ago or something, when a doctor told the emperor that he could actually find a way for him to be eternal. And you give me the most beautiful girls, the most beautiful boys, a lot of money, go by boat, and I will find actually the source of eternal youth in the island of that, because they have it. And it was the it was the largest sort of cookery in history of this world, because he did it twice to the emperor. The second time, he took so much money that he didn't have to come back, and he started basically the Japanese civilization with the most beautiful women and most beautiful boys, and a lot of money. Then he started the Aryan race of Japan. And what we have now, the emperor being, coming from this line, is really this long history of 2,000 years of very strong historical differences. And this cannot be solved in one day. This is something which is, they will never go as far as having a war, that I can guarantee you, because they know each other too well. They are brothers. And they know that they depend on each other. but they will go quite strong, that you will probably eventually have a limited war in Dario Island. That's a limited conflict. However, I think that America will involve in the conflict, that they will stop the conflict. It is of no interest to the state, United States of America, to have actually a conflict in Asia, in this area. Then they will stop it. Anyway, then I don't think we need to actually worry too much about this. Russia, you spoke about Russia. This pipeline, 10 years. I remember when I was working for a very big company involved in this, I can speak about it, BP TNK, Friedman, this young guy who became a billionaire, very clever Russian. They started to sort of negotiate, or start to negotiate this relationship between Russia and China. The problem with the Russian is everything you do in Russia, you need to sort of have a little envelope under the table. You need to have side companies and side deals. The corruption is reached sometimes 30, 35% of the entire deal. And the successive anti-corruption schemes of since Jean-Chistophe particularly did forbid most of the companies in China to really make deals with Russia. And over the last 10 years, basically, it was, the Russians were there, okay, we want to do the deal, but the deal is half price because we cannot actually cope with everything else. There's just corruption here and there and so on. And nobody wanted to do that also. I mean, I remember some friends in the administration in China saying, the last thing I want is to be sent to the Russian front, like the time of the war. Because, you're sent to the Russian front and then you are corrupted. You go back and you go to jail. No way. Okay, then that's the last job you want in China, is to be sent to the Russian front. Because we know, and you said it, rightly so, is that you do have actually an issue with Putin, he's a little bit forced to find other ways to sort of sell his gas. Then obviously now the Chinese waited the opportunity for the Russians to sell it cheaper, but also long term and without side deals. And obviously the Chinese said yes. They waited for 10 years. It's easy. Now it has nothing to do with the strategic alliance between Russia and China. Contrary to what the press has been saying, there is absolutely, they are talking about it because they really talk about our friends, everywhere. But there is no strategic alliance between Russia and China. And there will be no strategic alliance between Russia and China. I guarantee. China stands alone in this world as a friend of everybody. This is the number one principle of China. Deng Xiaoping will give you a reason for that. Deng Xiaoping, before dying, just in 1997, the former chief of staff of the military, who was a very close friend of Deng Xiaoping, young Bai Bin, went to see him and told him, well, he was about to become deputy chairman of the Central Military Commission, which is basically the entity which is running the military. And he says, what do we do if we have an issue in Taiwan? At that time, Taiwan was much more complicated. And then if the Americans are coming where they are boat, no, they say, what do we do with Taiwan? Just go on with your economy. Right? If the Americans are taking over Taiwan, with their boats who do not have any ship, you go on with the economy. And if they are actually starting to send rockets, you go on with your economy. This is what China, and this is the reason China will be a very important engine of peace also in this world, because before they react, I can tell you, you need really to get into, obviously if you get on their soil, if you start to deback like the Japanese, then they will react. As long as they do not go on their soil, the Chinese will not actually do anything. They will keep to their own economic growth pattern. This is what has been put forward by Deng Xiaoping, and this will not be derailed by any events in this world. They absolutely want it. to be as long as possible. And I think this is a very important element for us because it is also an element which will secure the maximum length of peace in the world, at least in Asia Pacific. Thank you. Can I have some questions?
Thank you very much, Professor. I have to say that it's really an uncommon insight of China. It's the opposite of what we read every day on newspapers. So thank you again. Thank you so much. So we start with the question and answer, and I just ask you to be kind enough to tell us your name and affiliation before the question. Thank you.
My name is Dr. I want to ask, as you told the party which is ruling China, how is the mechanism to enter in the party at the low level?
It's easy. Yeah, it's easy. To get into the party is not easy. It's easy to answer, but to get into the party is not easy. It's not like, to take a card and you run the block. You need to be proposed and seconded. And you need to have 1 year of preparation to be accepted to be a member of the party. And this 1 year of preparation, you basically, it's like the Jewish people for their training. You need to sort of learn about the party rules and the party history, and you have exam, and you need to pass the exam. It's a little bit easier for the farmers because of the fact that you've had a certain amount of illiterate farmers, and you could sort of be reaching to be member of the party without being able to read. Now, most of the farmers know how to do read. And the farmers, the way they get in is through school. At school, you do have a youth organization, and when they want to join the youth organization, they join it. And then within the youth organization, then if they want to go further, then they join the professional entity to be member of the party. Yeah. But as long as you've not proved your faith to the party, you cannot be member of the party. And it's a little bit more than just joining in party organization. It's actually be faithful to the party. Now, with this, I have to say, because a lot in the West, I'm spending my time in destroying preconception. However, I've been spending the last 20 years in doing that, and I have known, 20 years ago, all my speeches were sort of condemned, or more or less, because the people did not understand China. Now, I am actually asked to go to a conference everywhere. I actually stopped now going to conference. I accepted this one because my wife is Italian. But I have to do something for Italy, I think. But otherwise, they now I can acknowledge that actually what I have been speaking about or saying for the last 20 years is true. That is becoming true. But I have been now for 18 years professor at the university, Filippo University, and teaching political economics. And in 98, when I started, there was about, I have a class of 80 students, there was about 40 students which were in preparation. Now, you have between 70 and 80, a medium of 75. Meaning that the popularity and the legitimacy of the party among the youth has been increasing tremendously over the last 20 years. There was a bit of a low case 20 years ago, in fact, because of the entire reform about the people thought maybe they could sort of do something without the party and so on. And then they found out that actually the party has been extremely good for the well-off of the population. That their parents are better off, that they are better off, that everybody is better off around them. Then they thought that the party is doing well. And they are disciples of centralness, the Chinese. If you do not show in concrete terms that you are successful in implementing things, then you are worthless. Then the party will be strong as long as the success of China will be effective. This is a very important element. And it is. The party is extremely successful. As a consequence, everybody wants to join the party. You know, 20 years ago, there was only 45 million. We got 80 million now. It's a huge amount of the difference. Yeah?
Fabrizio Nida, I'm emeritus professor of international trade here in Milan, University of Bocconi. You raised so many questions, so I must. Number one, just technically speaking, the relation between the upper house and the lower house, it was not clear, and at least I did not understand. You are a member of the upper house.
Yes.
CCPCC.
CPPCC.
Okay.
Yeah, China People's Political Consultative Conference.
Okay. So I try to understand which similarity or dissimilarity there is within our own bicameralism, upper house and lower house. Second point, of course, Hong Kong. What is the perspective for Hong Kong Western civilization, including freedom of press? You never mentioned freedom. And third, possibly rural. You said the basic is farmers. As far as we know, the rural conditions between Western provinces and Eastern provinces are quite different. A lot of poverty. So what the Confucius harmonization? How can this harmonization fall in such inequalities within the same country?
The first question it was the constraint of the Parliament. What was your question?
The relation upper house and lower house.
Yeah, the relation is
What is the relative?
influence. Well, I mean, the lower house is legislative. The upper house is consultative. The lower house is legislative. Yes. Upper house is consultative.
Compared to the German.
A little bit, yes. And this is where actually you will hear a little bit about what they say the consultative democracy. Because you do have multi-party and you do have, I'm not a member of the party, and I have been a member of the House of Parliament. You do have foreigners in the House of Parliament. I'm the first Caucasian, but you do have actually about 5% of overseas Chinese who is member of the House of Parliament. That it covers the entire world. But France is the same also. I mean, France do have actually members of the House of Parliament which are outside France. That this is not really new, but the issue is consultative democracy. Yeah, it's probably for the moment it is only consultative, but this might evolve into a legislative house as well, similar to France or England. And that's where you will effectively have a multi-party organization with some amount of power. They have already power in a way because 80% of the bills are coming from them. Then they have an effective legislative power, but not so much because it is reviewed afterwards by the party, but and by the lower house, which is majority of 95% of the party. Now, the evolution there, the evolution I see, that's maybe I've never said it in any conference before, but the evolution I see here. And that's maybe where the only type of Western multi-party democracy could find a place in China, is if the upper house of Parliament, which is a wonderful parliament, I'm writing a book about it because nobody knows about it, and I've been the only Caucasian member, and I suppose I need to write to me. And the thing is that this, if becoming legislative, would be able to sort of eventually drag more than 85% of voice from people who are not members of the party. And that would be a great sort of alternative, you know, or for the Chinese to be able to prove that the Western model can be integrated in their own model, basically. You know. And I'm pushing for that. I've been pushing for that. Pushing now is actually quite key. The current leadership is a little bit different. Now, second question was what?
Hong Kong and freedom.
Yeah. Hong Kong. But Hong Kong, yes, is one China system. I think it has been going quite well. Freedom, yeah, freedom of speech. I mean, in Hong Kong, you do have a freedom of speech. There is no problem. But in China, in mainland China, you do have the Department of Propaganda, which is a department which is in the Central Committee, which runs down the pyramid. And this Department of Propaganda forbid to have so much of freedom of writing press, okay, written press, and actually also the other media, most of the media. But that is true. Now I cannot really sort of say that there is a freedom of press. There is not really. There is a limited freedom of press, but. Do we really need it? This is my question. Because, you see, I also never read the press in China. You take a taxi from the airport, and you go to your house. Well, me, I have a driver, but I'm trying not to tell my driver when I'm arriving. Then I take the taxi usually, and I spend actually half an hour to ask him what is going on. And I can tell you, there is absolutely no secret in China. Everybody knows everything about everything. You know? They didn't know about the other one, Bo Xilai problems before even he didn't know about it. You know? The bamboo telephone in China is quite incredible, actually. And they have been used to it for a very, very long time, but they didn't really need to have a written press. You know, they didn't know about Li Peng's son. You know, when he was 67, he got a child. You know, and he tried to be kept secret for 2 hours. And it has never been in the press, written press. Every minute is no. And you know, and then also this is the same thing. I mean, we spend our time in criticizing the leaders in China. If we went to lunch and dinners, it's only for that. We are criticizing the leaders all the time. In fact, we criticize leaders even in their face. Because when they are coming to lunch and dinners, you know, I have some sort of incredible sort of rhetorics, you know, around media, and they are not sort of, you know, shy of criticizing. You know, for example, something which I like very much, which is inherent from maybe old Soviet Union ways of doing things. In the upper house of the parliament, and in the lower house also, in certain areas, quite traditional, particularly in the northeast China, you have revolutionary, what do you call this? Revolutionary debate or something. Anyway, before before the day before, the night before the parliament is sitting at Changzhou, we have every year, once a year, we have all of us underground, and we have members of the community here. A lot, you know, farmers, families, thousands of people. Under the parliament is a huge room with pillows for this, and then you have this, and then people outside and so on. And I was very surprised and shocked because the people, the members of the public, are going to throw things to the mayors and to the party secretary and things. Your brother is corrupted because of this and this and this, and he allowed that and that. And then, in the meantime, you have people writing and reporting to the head of the police station. But anyway, little bit like you know, the revolutionary sort of things in France, you know, the La Commune, you know, or after the revolution, you know, Robespierre and so on. It's a little bit like this. And I saw with my eyes, you know, the most absolutely incredible critics being thrown to the leaders. And the leaders then justifying themselves, trying to say, no, it's not that, it's this, and so on. And then when I go back to Europe, and they say, no press, no freedom, the people cannot speak about anything. I doubt I could do that in France. The French, I mean, they are actually, they think they are actually top of the world with their revolutionary things, but I think that when you are not in the circle, you really not in the circle at all. Then you, it's difficult to do anything. Now, the thing is that it's, I like to criticize the French because I'm a French national, that's the only country I can't remember. Okay. My wife and my daughter is Italian. I'm not yet an Italian, soon I will criticize Italian. Anyway, now, it's much, at least much more fun. The thing is that, I mean, concerning, yes, you're right, in absolute terms, you do not have that much freedom of the press. But concerning very specific things, like criticizing the leaders on their agenda, political agenda. However, Li Yuanchao, who is now a state vice president, very good friend of mine, wonderful man, is someone, when he was organizational, he was minister of the organizational department in the Central Committee. Li Yuanchao has instituted something when he was back in, even before, when he was minister. He instituted something is that when you have the election of a leader, or the proposal for the election of a leader somewhere, then it's open to the comments of the people. Okay, the people can go and they have a website and they say, well, we do not think this guy is good because, you know, corruption, because of this and this, because he's not good. Sometimes it's this. He's not competent. And you can imagine how many proposed leaders has been turned down over the last 4 years because of that. I mean, I would like to see that coming to France. Before actually the nomination of you know, a minister or whatever, you know, people would sort of speak and say about, you know, what they think about it, and then find out that half of them are incompetent. Yeah, that would be quite good. Then obviously you do have more candidates in China because it's a larger country, and you do not have that many candidates in China, in France, because nobody wants to do anything. But anyway, so the question was what? Yes, the rural unrest. It's another question, in fact, but I can answer it as well. The difference, you do have a major difference between the East and West. But the difference, the major difference, is not between the East and the West. The East and West has been tackled now for more than 20 years through the urbanization program, and to tier 3, tier 4, tier 5, and this is not so much of a problem. And a huge amount of money has been poured to the West for the last 20 years. But the problem is more the difference of between the city and the country. In fact, even in Jiangsu, you do have poverty, certain amount of poverty in the countryside by opposition to the city. And it's more a city-country difference, that, where the capital is situated. It's not the west-east, it's city-country. It was, you're right, 20 years ago it was, but not anymore. Now it's city-country. Now, this is a difference of wealth in absolute terms, because you do have also a spending, a power purchase capacity, which is, you need to look at it not in terms of how much the person is earning, but in terms of power purchase. In the countries, even next door, huh? You are in Chongqing, in the north, for example, you're in my constituency. Now, you are in Chongqing. I've left this constituency, by the way. I was part of the committee of Shanghai, and now I'm elected in Shenzhen. Anyway, it doesn't matter. you have Chongqing and you have the countryside, because there was a lot of farmers. You go half an hour from the city of Changchun and you are in the countryside. Okay? Now, in Changchun, you would have a medium salary of about maybe 3,000 renminbi, and in the countryside, which is half an hour away, you have a median salary maybe of 600 renminbi. And it's a huge gap when you think about it. But in the middle of the city of Changchun, okay, one potato will be probably 4 or 5 times the cost of the potato half an hour away. The cost of living is 10 times more in the city than in the countryside. Yeah, at the end of the day, the people actually prefer now, at the beginning they wanted all to be in the city. Now, since last year, you start to have the reverse. People preferring to go to live in the countryside because it's cheaper, basically. Yeah, the purchasing power. Then, as a consequence, you need really to look at this issue in terms of purchasing power. And you will find out that the people in the countryside doesn't live so badly. And in fact, they live quite well, particularly since we've had, and we are having now, this social security for them. You know? Because in the past it was more difficult for that, because they were not part of the direct, they were not part of the unit of work, and then the unit of work would not be able to sort of cover the cost of health. Now that it will be able, it's 50%, but I think by the end of the decade will be 100% covered, then it will be fine. Everybody will go back to the countryside. Social unrest, that's also the very big evolution. It's true that 10 years ago, particularly in the Georgian time, there was a kind of a rush to be rich, and in the country, and when you look at actually the biggest billionaires in China, they are all coming from the countryside, because they've been able to sort of use and abuse the system, and through corruption particularly, they've been able, the property developer, to acquire land, in abusing the system, in corrupting some of the officials at village or township level, county level. And this has created a lot of sort of discontent in the countryside, like in Guangdong, for example, in Zhejiang, and a lot of unrest. And it is true. And this has been extremely complicated. Now, one of the first things the land reform has done, the reason why Hu Jintao has been able to push the land reform, because the land reform is definitely not socialist. It's like giving the property back to the ownership, the land use right ownership, but it's still one step towards having the ownership of the country in the hands of the people, of individual people, not in the hand of the country. Then, once you cross this stage to having the individuals owning the land, well, you only got France as the last communist country, really. What happened is Hu Jintao, in order to push this at the Central Committee, said that we do have a lot of unrest because of this corruption, which we cannot deal with because it's endemic. What can we do? We need to give the power back to the farmers, in order that the farmers can fight against it by themselves. And it's true. I am the farmer. It's not anymore the municipal government taking over your land. You have your land. And you see the guy, you see the real estate entrepreneur coming to you and saying, okay, I want to buy your land. Okay, fine. Let's deal. And then they get the money. And I can tell you now, they're very happy, the farmers, because they get quite rich. I mean, some of the farmers, I remember around Zhejiang, if you travel by car from Shanghai to Hanzhou in Zhejiang, in the south of Shanghai. You go and you see castles everywhere. Castles. Everywhere. A copy of Disneyland castle. And you have thousands of them. It's quite amazing. And other farmers, and rich farmers, because of the last sort of, since 2006 and 2005, basically the last 8 years of this new model. And then you have far less amount of discontent now. There's two elements, land reform and being able to pay for social security will make that the discontent in the countryside will lower dramatically. But you've still got some areas which are very corrupted, but they are dealing with it. I don't think there will be that much of a problem in the future. You wanted to have a question?
So, Miriam Campanella, European Center of International Political Economy of Brussels. So my question is very technical if you want, but you are so huge on the institutional networking in China, perhaps you could have a response for me. I prepared this question because I am now researching on renminbi, its rising on the global stage. So it's about the People's Bank of China. So I would ask you, please, how he is now positioned, the People's Bank of China, especially its governor, Zhu Shuachuan, I don't know the translation, sorry, and his allies into the bank. Because at this moment, the bank is taking in this date, and it was tomorrow, many important monetary decisions about reserve requirements for some banks lending to farm. This is very important, key problem in China, and consumer credit. And further, has made a huge improvement in terms of revaluing the renminbi. So this is important because in the last few months, the bank was dumping the currency in order to discourage risky investments on the currency. So I want to ask you, please, how do you think about the bank in the driving seat of macroeconomic and financial reforms in China, and whether there is hope, or as you told us, with Chinese characteristics, the bank is coming out as an independent institution. No, not at all. This I understand. Okay.
No, and of course not. Mr. Zhou is also a very, very good man. At the time of Zhou Enji, when he came, he was the only one understanding among the leaders, understanding about macrofinance, basically. That's the reason why he was put in the job, and he has been doing an excellent job, and that's the reason why he stayed in the job. But obviously, he's not too young. He's actually really past the time of retirement. But it means that they did not find someone else as good as he has been, I suppose. And I like him very much. He's very straightforward. He's a no-nonsense guy. What are your questions? You have one element of your question which is extremely important. Is concerning this is a worrying. This is a bit of a worrying thing. I'm not sure if we will be able to get through that easily. You write the lending element is a very big reason. The lending problem at the local village is the reason why I have casted my vote to slow down the land reform. Because I am a farmer. Okay. You're a farmer, you're a farmer. I don't want to farm. I want to go to the city to open a hairdresser. We are neighbors. Okay. You are a farmer. You want to stay. You don't want to do the city. You want to stay there. You sort of. I can give you, the language right for 10 or 20 years on my land, but obviously you need to pay me. You have access, you have the possibility, because it's for 10 years now, to acquire motorization, that's tractors, right? To make sure that you've got more land in Canada. But you need to have money, and you do not have money, or a small amount of money. Then you need to sort of go to a bank, for the bank to give you a loan, to give me the money, for me to live, and for you to come. And this loan system at the village level started in 2006-7. For 2 or 3 years, had enormous amount of problems because of corruption. Because who would handle the loan? It would be the local government, which means the local government would have a huge amount of power to tell who would get the loan. Because everybody wants to have it. Picking the winner.
Yeah.
It means that you will get the loan, but you give half to me in cash. Okay, that's the corruption. Then they said, well, that's quite complicated, because if we wanted to sort of get rid of the corruption, and we have more corruption, but to the financial sort of side of it, then they organized to have, that was at the beginning, it was local banks. Then they then decided to organize centrally managed credit agencies. That's what you're referring to be able to not having the local government people involved, but basically other people from the province or even higher in selecting or trying to give these loans. And also what they call county banking, that is even international institution. Right? A lot of HSBC, Standard Chartered, CPA, and so on, has been involved in starting credit county banking, 100% renminbi-based banks, very easily. For nothing, you can have a bank in China. Now, if you're already a bank, like Citigroup and so on. And the primary role is to be able to finance, in fact, these people. Then that was the first solution. The second solution also is that you need to limit also the amount of time you, as a farmer, you give your land use right. Normally it's 50 years. Huh? Is 50 years because it's rolling. I've had an apartment for now 12 years and so on, and after 40 years it will be rolling like in Hong Kong. But however, it's 50 years. Now, if you give 50 years, but basically you give the ownership, the land use right ownership, to the other person, you do not have any security anymore. You go to the country, to the city, you start a dress shop, but you do not have, but you can be successful, but you can also not be successful. You're not successful, then what do? You know, you go back to your country, your village, and then you're a liability for the village. Then that was another issue. Then they are now limiting the time actually for land use right, because for the farmers, this land is all what they get. They have. Then it's a big element for the stability of the country. Okay? Let's suppose everything. Why do you have the hookah, the system in China? It's because the people need to be settled somewhere. You cannot have 1 billion people, traveling everywhere. I mean, it's the hell. You need to have the people. The management of the country has always been, and the hookah is not an invention of the communists. That's another stupidity of the press. The hookah come from the Tang Dynasty. Okay? And they need to be fixed somewhere. Otherwise, if you travel everywhere, it will be chaos in the country. Then you need to. You do not need to have satellites. You need to have people settling down. Okay. Okay, that's another thing. So 2 elements which were very important. But the most important, and that's what I've told to the former Deputy Prime Minister of, Mr. Hui, not a long time ago, is that it's quite important to slow down the process. Because if you go very fast, even the central credits will have corruption element. And to somehow make trials, because also China is a big country, but China is not like a uniform country. The people in the north are very different from the people in the south. The people in the north, they are more fighting people. You know, they like to drink and to be with their friends. You know, like. The South people, they are more with their family. You know, and they are small with brown hair, and they do not eat the same thing. Okay, and they do not speak the same language. They write the same. They do not speak the same language. They are very different people in China. Then you need to sort of do trials of things a bit everywhere before getting to a national level. That's the reason why the land reform is not yet completed, and I don't think the land reform will be completed before the end of the decade. To come back to your question concerning Mr. Zhou and the policy in concern with the People's Bank of China, first of all, the People's Bank of China, PBOC, will never cease to be the PBOC. Okay? It will always be, PBOC is actually is at this level. PBOC is a unit of the state control. I don't know where I put it. It is at the level of the state administration, PBOC. It's a ministry, the PBOC. It's like a unit of the government. Then this will never, I mean, to have a PBC independent from the state council, I do not see the point. That's the first thing. The second thing is that part of the reason of all these changes lately come from one small revolution, which is the introduction by Li Keqiang, and particularly his deputy prime minister, Zhang Gaoli, who used to be party secretary of Chengdu, and in charge of finance now, of introducing truly private banks in China. Because until now, you do not have private banks. You know, it's you have Bank of China, you have Bank of Agriculture, Bank of Communication, okay, even Minsheng Bank, which was considered as a private bank, is not a private bank because it's controlled by the Chinese government. Then you now have a possibility, and that is probably the unique element of we've got to focus about the new trade zone, you know, of Shanghai, is where actually these banks will be settled. From billionaires like Mr. Ma, Jack Ma, like Mr. Zhu from Wahaha and so on, will be able to sort of create their own bank, because the problem in China is that there's a big problem is that you can become rich. There's no problem. Nobody will forbid you to become rich. But then what do you do with your wealth? Until now, you were putting your wealth in real estate, because this was the best, you know, because then you could get even richer. You know? But then now the problem is that the government tied up the real estate, you know, because it didn't want, you know, Beijing, you know, my flat, which I bought 12 years ago for 700,000 renminbi, is now worth 6 million. You know, 12 years afterwards, and you can understand that people can't follow this. They cannot follow the blue workers and the white-collar workers in the companies. They cannot afford their apartment. Then the Chinese has been applying a very big cooling of the price of the properties, which has gone against the real estate market. Then what do you do with your money? Okay, some of them goes to Macau, but you know, very few want to waste their money. Then a lot of them are going outside. The reason why you see many of the private entrepreneurs acquiring companies or assets outside China is for this reason. Sometimes a bit strangely, because they acquire assets which we think are not so good. They acquire them because they have cash and they want to. This is going also favors, particularly in the last 2 or 3 years, the capital flight. Okay? To go against this capital flight, then they thought, and that's how John Gaoli has been able to push the bill, accepted this year, beginning of the year, at the subcommittee of finance of the NPC, the National People's Congress, is to organize a dozen of private banks where these big rich people will be able to pour out their money instead of going outside. Because, you know, China is still the best country where to invest. You know, you put 100 somewhere in China, you're about to really get actually 200 in 2 or 3 years. You know, you put 100, you know, in France, you lose it. Now, And the consequence, you really need to have a way to keep the money in China. And that's the reason why you've got, you really, it's not finished, it's just the start of this PBOC sort of new scheme of things, which will, one, be able to sort of allow these people to put poor money into these private banks in Shanghai, which are being constructed now, and two, to somehow release the flow of funds, okay, and effectively do something with your money. Because also the people do not believe. I mean, there was a hype about 10 years ago when the Shanghai and Shenzhen Stock Exchange came into being. But everybody's lost so much money with this, and now they do not want to put their money in stock exchange. They do not believe in the stock exchange. The Chinese do not believe in stock exchange. Yeah. It's very interesting. It's not in their feeling things. You know, they like concrete things. You know, banks where the money is, and, okay. But stock exchange, banks and real estate, very sort of concrete things. You know, where the money is and where the real estate is. Then you will have a huge amount of quantitative easy, you know, in the future to allow actually the possibility for this money to stay in China. Yes.
Thank you very much. Just let me add that we have many questions to.
There is one.
Yeah, there is one. The last one, please, and we do just a short Q&A, and we have the light lunch left.
Thank you very much. Franco Giacomazzi, Politecnico di Milano. Thank you, Professor, for your nice lecture and comments. You explained us a very strange for us, a sophisticated system of political governance. My question is, do you think that Western diplomatic political system does always understand these subtleties, these refinements, in order to act in consequence?
I didn't understand the end.
Do you think that the Western political system does always understands this refinement, this different culturally?
And I will take also, yes, I will take another question from a younger person over there. Do you have questions as youngsters over there? Because I like young people ask me questions about China. Because they know everything.
Maybe China's approach.
No? You do not have questions? Yes? Yes.
I hope I'm young enough. I'm Jan Grzelski from FEEM here. I'm a macroeconomist, and until now a very simplified model how where does economic growth comes from in China. Simply it was coming from precautionary savings because they don't have pension system, because they don't have national security. People were saving a lot, and I also thought farmers are saving a lot. This helps capital deepening, and this fuels the growth. Now after this lecture, this model did collapse. We say that most of the savings are actually coming from wealthy people. Is it so? And
most of the what?
Most of the savings comes from the wealthy people. Well, okay. My question is, what part of savings are actually coming from poor people, from farmers?
No.
And how the national, the fund, people's fund, would affect the savings?
Yeah. No, it's not true. The great majority of the savings come from poor people. It's the country. Because I mean, poor. It's not poor people. I mean, you do not have poor people per se in China in a way. It's a developing country, which means that the means of people is much, the GDP per capita is much lower than here. But they also can live with very small amount of money. I've been when I was with the soldiers. I've been living with €1 even per day actually. For 3 years, very well, and that was in 97, 98, 99. Now, but in the countryside, okay, let's suppose that they have. It's a very good question, in fact, because let's suppose that the farmers, you have to go back to maybe 10 years ago. Okay. 10 years ago, at that time you will have about 600 million farmers. Okay. 600, maybe more, I think 650, 680 million. 80 million, not 80 million. Now, there's farmers who would sort of have a medium of salary, get money, but not necessarily a salary. They would get, roughly speaking, probably around a medium of 700 renminbi per month. They would be able to save probably 200 to 300 renminbi per year and live every month on 500 renminbi. Because, you know, they are farmers, and they live from their crops, they live from, you know, they kill a pig. I remember I used to go to the countryside every time they used to kill their pig. Anyway, and I said, no, please, do not, please. I want to go to your country, but do not kill any pig, please. You know, because I hate it, it's terrible. You know, and they are very clever in the countryside in China. The country people are very clever. In fact, there is no difference between being prime minister or being a village farmer, because they have to survive with one another. And they actually, when you speak to the people, I told that to a lot. To Zhuangji, he used to laugh a lot. And I used to tell him that there is no difference between you and the farmer. But he used to laugh very much. But it's true. It's true. The people are very clever in China. I've never met any stupid people in China. I remember the first time I went to the countryside. I went in Mongolia, and in Mongolia, and it was pretty cool. And there was, in the countryside, you have a bed like this, which is in concrete. And one room, now we've got two rooms, and in the other room you have the fire, the woods, which is being put into for the cuisine. Okay, and it is this sort of warm stone on the other room for the bed, but it's concrete bed. And then you have the because he was a student of mine, which I followed to the family. And then there was a grandmother, the mother, the father, my friend, my student, and myself. And we slept, this. Now, the first day I slept on this sort of bed, it was actually quite complicated. Because, I'd never been used to sort of basically sleep on the concrete floor. Anyway, then I couldn't sleep. But in the middle of the night, 2 o'clock, there was a kind of a moon, and I saw 3 little piglets. Little piglets, and they were huazhu, that is, they were sort of with flowers, pink flowers, little piglets. And then 3 little piglets came into the room, like this, and then was searching for the rest of the rice and so on for eating. And I was not sleeping, and I looked at them and so on. And then all of a sudden there was one who saw me. And he looked at me. And I looked at him. And he looked at me. And then he continued his business. He thought he's the foreigner and no more. But then the grandmother then started to be awake. And I can tell you the 3 piglets, they were paf! They went to the blue folk that didn't know that it was the grandmother. Anyway, but all this to say is that it had actually, I don't know why I'm speaking about this, but you need to have actually a feeling for the countryside in China. Part of the reason of my success in China come from because I am a farmer, a big farmer, because I'm a landowner, I'm a baron. But I've got a big farm, I've got a lot of farmers and so on. And I have been born and bred in the countryside with farming elements. And when you're a farmer, and you speak about the farms, you speak about the simple life of the farm in China, you automatically accept it. I have been spending my time speaking with the Prime Minister or the President, with Regent about actually farming. When they are coming to visit me in France, they don't want to go and see the French politicians. No. They want to go and see my cattle. They are more interested in the cattle than the French politician, which I agree. But it's true. I mean, I'm speaking about ministers. I'm speaking about Liu and Charles, the state vice president. They get to see me, and so I get they want to see the cattle, how they are managed, the relationship with the farmers and so on. It's still a very, very country, people. And so on. Anyway, to answer your question, you've got 680 million of those, putting every month 300 renminbi. Well, you calculate. After 10 years, it makes trillion of savings. It's much more than the billionaires in the cities. In fact, the billionaires in the cities, they spend their money like hell. They are putting their money into sort of real estate. There's no savings. In fact, the billionaires are poorer than the farmers in China, in a way, because they look at their security. And this is the reason why nowadays, with this social security fund, with the fact that actually 100% of their health envelope will be covered, means that they will at last, why is the China Agricultural Bank the largest bank of China? It's not the bank of China. Well, it's the second largest after ICBC. But why it has been, because it's not a small bank, you do not see anywhere actually this bank, apart from the countryside. It's because that's where the savings are. They have the savings of the farmers. They open an account, they put it up every month, they put them 300. Okay. Now, these savings are not being used for the money. Now, you just imagine, you've got trillion of renminbi not used in the China Agricultural Bank, which are ready soon, by the end of the decade, to be used to fuel the consumption, of the internal consumption of the country. Fantastic. I mean, it's American multiplied by 10. That's what we need. And that's what to answer the question. Your question? No, absolutely not. Actually, I can tell you, I have been an advisor of also lately of the US State Department and of many other departments in England as well and France as well. And I can tell you, politicians and even not only politicians, but also civil servants, which I think worse than politicians, because politicians comes and goes, but civil servants are a little bit more difficult. Particularly in the protocol, particularly in the foreign office of other countries, I've got a lot of difficulties to understand actually the Chinese political system. And I used to do a crusade of trying to sort of, speak and try to push, this. But it's very difficult. But little by little, the people will know how to understand and to deal with the Chinese. The Chinese also adapt also themselves. For example, the foreign office in China typically would sort of go and organize, templates, which looks like Western templates. In order, it's quite funny actually. In order that the people sort of relate to what they know. And that particularly for parliamentarians, because the most stupid people in the West are the parliamentarians. They really don't want to. Then they need to have very simple things, when they go and travel to China, particularly, in order not to make big gaff, But then they organize this kind of templates. But however, this is not so much of a problem because I think that one of the big strengths of the Chinese, and I would feel the love I have for these people, is that this is a very, very inclusive, integrative people. Okay, very different from the Japanese. The Japanese, because my professorship at Oxford used to be sponsored by the Sasagawa Foundation, and I used to go to Tokyo, and
can we go to lunch? I'm sorry.
Yes, when I finish. Thank you. The thing is that and you have to listen to what I'm telling now. I think it's quite important for you. The thing is that when you go to Japan, you have an exclusiveness. It's a country. You cannot go to the sauna because you're white. Even if you're Chinese, you cannot go. You look like the Japanese. No, you cannot. You're Korean, you cannot go to the sauna. In China, you can go everywhere. You include it. You integrate it. You feel like you are Chinese in China. I feel like I am a Chinese in China. I have absolutely never had any of this weight of exclusion. And this is a very big strength. In Mongolia, that's the last thing I will say. I remember the first time I went to my family, my friend family, my student's family. I went there, and we went to the sauna. Okay. And it was the first time they ever seen actually a white person in the sauna. Then they integrate, oh yeah, come to the Solana Wash and stuff, and you have a committee of people like this. They like committees, you know. Like I told you about all these committees. Right? They like committees. They like to go together and think about things. Oh, yeah, after all, you know, it's not as large as we thought. Anyway, because we are all making the thing is that you are an integration within actually the society. And we really feel that it's only in the morning when I wake up and I say, oh, I'm still a lone wolf guy. You know? Well, anyway, I think it's a wonderful country, but again, what I would sort of recommend you is to go there, okay, and to speak with the people. It's easy also. It's a very easy thing. Do not read actual professors' things. Also, just go there and speak with the people, and also because you will speak with people, and when you want something, you ask the person to, recommend you to meet the right person, and you go like this. You know, in order to meet a minister in China, when you go like this, it's almost impossible. If you ask your friend, you can meet the minister out of a lunch or a dinner. You know, it's very interesting. You know, you've got this informality of relationship with the people, which means that the protocol forbids you to meet the person per se, you know, but it allows you, the people of the country, allows you to meet the leaders and to speak to the leaders, and also, in a way, to influence the leaders as well. Anyway, thank you very much.